Hello and welcome to the Geeks Review. I'm Royce.
And I'm Joshua.
This week marks the 10-year anniversary since the release of the first Avengers movie. Where has that time gone?
You got me.
Yeah, we're going to take a look back at that film, offer our thoughts, see how the series came into being, and what effect it's had on filmmaking and pop culture in the decades since. Now, superhero movies have been around since the 1940s. You know, with the Batman serials, we had the Batman TV show and movie in the 1960s, Christopher Reeve's Superman in the 1970s, and Tim Burton's Batman, and Joel Schumacher's Batman as well in the 80s through to the 90s. But Marvel hadn't had too much success on the silver or small screen.
No, the dark age of movies really had a lot more Marvel than DC at that time. Entries like Blade, the old school X-Men films with Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart, which sort of elevated comic book status.
Yeah, I mean, and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man as well.
Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, yes, can't forget that.
But it was in 2005 where Marvel decided they wanted to make films themselves. And in 2007, the 33-year-old Kevin Feige came up with the plan for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which would be an interconnected series of films, sort of in the vein of the comic books in the 70s under Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, where you'd have recurring themes, characters, plots, culminating in a massive crossover film like The Avengers in 2012. But before that, we had Iron Man in 2008, as well as The Incredible Hulk, the often forgotten Marvel Cinematic Universe film, in 2008, Iron Man 2 in 2010, and Thor and Captain America, the First Avenger, in 2011. This led to The Avengers, starring Robert Downey Jr., Scarlett Johansson, Chris Evans, Chris Hemsworth, Jeremy Renner, and Mark Ruffalo, as well as Samuel L. Jackson, joining up to take on Loki, played by Tom Hiddleston, the angry Norse god of mischief who sought to wreak havoc on Earth and across the galaxy. So yes, what was your exposure to this series?
I had first started watching Marvel back in the early cartoons, actually. My first exposure to Marvel in general was the old X-Men.
Oh, yes.
Back in the 90s. And then...
Very familiar with that, I am now.
Yes. The oddly overlooked Invincible Iron Man TV show.
Oh, yes. I know of that one.
Yeah, very short run.
So when the Iron Man film came out in 2008, you were familiar with it, were you?
I was a bit more familiar. Granted, it had been a very long time since I had seen it, so it's kind of faded. It's like, hang on, wait. Then sort of the theme music went from, oh, hey, it's that guy!
Yeah, Iron Man was big when it came out. I think people would... I mean, he had a lot going for it. He had Robert Downey Jr., who was, an actor who had a lot of character to him. Sort of a colourful past, and he brought that to the character of Tony Stark.
He was made for the role, a lot of people have said, and I guess he did bring a lot of himself to it.
And that was also the same year that The Dark Knight came out.
Yes.
Which, massive. Heath Ledger was front and centre in that, and you had Iron Man, which was a hero most people had never heard of, competing against that, sort of holding its own, being very different, and sort of having a few letdowns here and there, but it was something that people loved.
It was a very good film. Granted, they had to change a few things here and there, but it was a very good movie. One of the first films to actually sort of modernize a character's origin story. Yeah,
setting it in the present-day war on terror against that backdrop, which a lot of us were familiar with, and could understand as weapons developer and kind of see where he was coming from when he had a change of heart.
Absolutely.
Without getting too graphic, but...
Well,
it's quite...
It definitely, for the first film, it set a good standard where it didn't shy away from some graphic content. Because this film, the first Iron Man, is actually one of the few, in Australia at least, Marvel films that does actually have the M rating still.
Yes, really?
Yeah, with the, I think the only other one that has the M rating and definitely earns it is Winter Soldier.
You mean some of these films have since been reclassified as
I
like
don't think
PG?
they've been reclassified, but they don't earn the rating that they've had.
Yeah. I remember when I was a kid when Attack of the Clones was rated as an M, and that was kind of like, oh, okay, this is an M-rated Star Wars film, and now it just seems like every film like this sort of gets slapped with an M rating, just in general.
Because it has more than enough to not be slapped with the PG rating here, but it doesn't quite earn that M. It's just like how nowadays PG doesn't quite feel like PG anymore.
Yeah, it's just, I guess, a safety.
Yeah.
Well, it's just classified as this to sort of keep people happy. It makes sense.
Well, at least ours is a bit more straightforward than having to deal with the American system. You know,
The American system.
PG-13.
Yeah, that is wild. And I remember, I know some people go how, they say how this is like a hard PG. I think the recent Batman movie was a PG-13 in America, which is about equivalent to an M rating. But
yeah,
one reviewer said, like, yeah, this is what, you know, PG-13 used to be, not like your Avengers stuff now, which is which sort of have oscillated in terms of like graphicness and maturity.
It has, actually. It really Joss Whedon really did create the template when he did Avengers, and then they've kind of just stuck with it. It's only recently that I actually discovered that Marvel do a pre-graphicking. So that's pretty much, they'll do nearly the entire movie, nearly shot for shot, rendering it on the computer, and then they'll hand it off to the director and say, that. Like, I can't remember who it was. She was meant to direct something.
Captain Marvel, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was another director who was chosen, who basically said, well, they gave me no control. Or maybe it was Black Widow.
Yeah, it was Black Widow, because they said, don't worry about the action scenes, because we've got that.
Yeah, which, I mean, it's a lot to take on. And a lot of directors that we're sort of jumping all over the place in terms of talking about the history of this series. But these films, they tend to hire directors who are more independent, like Chloe Zhao with The Eternals. The directors of Captain Marvel actually only did Mississippi Grind, which is a very introspective, dark film about gambling addiction with Ben Mendelsohn and Ryan Reynolds, which probably explains why Ben Mendelsohn then showed up in the film they directed.
Yeah.
Great actor anyway, but nice little Easter egg there, I guess. But you come from directing something like that, where it's like, okay, let's come up with what's the logistics of shooting a scene where two guys are talking in a car. And then suddenly you've got to direct, okay, Kree versus Skrulls versus, you know, Hulk and Iron Man, and how do you do with that? So it makes sense when you've got effect houses and effect directors who are then like, don't worry about that, we'll handle the burden of that. But it's very limiting, I can imagine, for some directors who want to do more.
And it sort of almost justifies my feel when it comes to Marvel, because I guess you could say my attachment to the Marvel films has really waned over the years, because they just start to feel samey.
As of the time of recording, I mean, it's Thursday, and we just had episode 5 of Moon Knight last night, which was very mature.
Very mature.
Like, in terms of dealing with themes of abuse and trauma.
Absolutely, and I applaud it, because it's finally breaking. The shows are really breaking away from the mold, which has been a real refresher.
Well, going back to these films, those first 5 films, Iron Man, Iron Man 2, Incredible Hulk, Thor, and Captain America, the First Avenger, are kind of like the Wild West.
Yeah.
In a way. They're still trying to find their feet, and it was really the Avengers, directed by Whedon, as you said, the creator of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, who's a bit on the out now, you know, kind of see how things have changed in the last decade. That really was the film that set the standard for what these films would be for a long time.
And sort of almost gave Marvel the third act curse that would plague them later on, because they keep trying to up the scale. You know, the world's always in jeopardy. Yeah. And I was sort of looking back at all of these films when you told me what the theme for today was, and I remembered the line from the opening of Incredibles, you know, no matter how many times you try to save the day, the world always ends up back in jeopardy. You know, I would just like it to stay saved. Yeah. For a minute. I just cleaned up this mess. Can we leave it for 5 minutes?
Well, looking back at Iron Man 1, and it's Jeff Bridges in a robot suit as a big villain. But you're also dealing with film themes of terrorism.
Yes.
And pretty
Domestic
explicit.
terrorism as well.
Yeah. And, I mean, you get a bit of that through into Iron Man 3.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was really just them trying to find their feet, and it was those successes. But I remember where I heard or saw the post-credit scene for the first Iron Man, which is Samuel L. Jackson as the character Nick Fury, who was the leader of an organisation called S.H.I.E.L.D., who kind of organised the Avengers and sort of oversaw defence against all these great threats against Earth. Sort of show up and say, I want to talk to you about the Avengers initiative. That was something so wild.
It was like, whoa.
And
there's
then
more to this?
I watched Incredible Hulk for a class project. We were reviewing superhero movies. So it was the first X-Men, it was Mask of the Phantasm, and it was the Incredible Hulk. And I love the Incredible Hulk. I love that film. And when Tony Stark shows up at the end of that movie to talk to William Hurt, that was like a mind-blown moment. Yeah,
well.
yeah. Gosh, I mean, that was very long ago, wasn't it? Yeah, it was very sad. But just seeing that crossover,
It just solidifies
I guess
the
as a
connective
kid,
tissue.
I kind of assumed that would be the case. You'd have like Superman would exist and Batman would exist, and they'd be in the same universe as they are in the comics, but they never were really.
No, they'd only pop up every so often.
And then this was the film to really do that and
Yes.
make it its mission in life. And it had an impact, to say the least. People saw the money that Avengers made and wanted some of that themselves.
Absolutely. DC tried to boot its own cinematic universe after having large successes with an animated connective universe.
And also coming off the success of Nolan's trilogy as well.
Absolutely. Pity the start of it was Green Lantern.
Yeah, you kind of forget that Green Lantern was supposed to be the first film in that series. That was the Ryan Reynolds starring one.
Yes, it was.
And it was Bill Skarsgård, no, the actor who played the villain in that, and he just showed up in the Batman as the corrupt lawyer or something. One of the Skarsgårds, but he's not a Skarsgård, like a Stellan Skarsgård. One of them.
One of them. I just remember Mark Strong as Sinestro.
Very good casting, very good look there, but it just wasn't to be. And
No.
Taika Waititi was in that as well.
He was, actually. He was Hal's friend.
He was a Maori guy playing an Inuit,
Yes.
which he said didn't feel very right.
No. But I think DC has seen a bit more success with Green Lantern in the Green Lantern animated series. But we're not here to talk about DC, we're here to talk about Marvel.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at what they achieved with Marvel, and I mean, The Dark Knight came out the same year as the first Iron Man, 2008, and in 2012, you had the Avengers, which just knocked everyone's socks off and sort of blew everyone's minds in terms of what was possible to juggle 5 characters.
5 characters. I mean, this is from the same studio for longest time. Could it handle more than one villain in a film?
Yeah, and it's debatable whether they can still do that. I mean, I think Spider-Man, the recent Spider-Man, did that okay.
It did it better than previous Spider-Man.
It certainly did. Although the animated Spider-Man did that pretty well.
Yes.
Spider-Verse. Spider.
Spider.
When are they going to do a live-action, big-screen Italian Spider-Man? I want to see that. But yeah, so Avengers came out the same year as The Dark Knight Rises.
It did.
Which, it's not my favourite Batman movie.
No. No, it's not.
But yeah, you can kind of see Warner Brothers must have been like, well, we want to do what they're doing. So yeah, they rushed Man of Steel into production. And on the other side, you had things like the Dark Universe, which was intended to be a big
monster movies from the old school Hammer films.
Starting with The Mummy. Tom Cruise's Mummy.
No.
Which had, what was it, Russell Crowe playing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and just basically sets up Dracula and all this other stuff. No. Johnny Depp was the Invisible Man, which was supposed to happen, which didn't happen. Well, we've since had the Elizabeth Moss starring Invisible Man film. Proper horror film, not like this sort of pseudo horror action film which they were sort of going for, big crowd pleaser. It just goes to show that the work that Marvel put in, we sort of take for granted now.
We do.
And these big studios just think, we can get a bunch of actors together.
We can, I mean, it looks so easy, we can do it.
Yeah, it's not.
No.
And that first Avengers movie really just set the stage.
It did. It became the real showstopper, and then they've been trying to almost recapture that magic ever since. And I think the closest they got to it was with Endgame, despite my lacking opinion on Endgame.
Yeah.
Because I've read the comics, and I prefer the comics to what we got. I will give them, it's like, creative. But,
It's something that doesn't quite hold up on the rewatch or out of the cinema.
No.
It's very much made for the cinema, that film.
It is.
It did not need to be.
Infinity War.
I think Infinity War told a more cohesive story, at least by putting Thanos front and center and just having all the other characters, like, them,
Yeah.
they've got strong enough traits, we can sort of sprinkle them throughout,
We don't need to explain these guys. They look scary. They look menacing. Oh, hey, you know this guy.
Yeah. It's, and it all just goes back to that film. Remember when that post-credit scene of Thanos was teased and...
Yes, played by a different actor at the time as well.
Yes, I do not know his name.
I know where he is. I know the guy. I just don't remember his name. He's actually lent his likeness to video games.
Oh, really?
Yes. He has a lot of money. Money came in as playing one of the criminal main characters of the Payday series.
Oh.
The
Damien Poitier.
That's him.
Damien Poitier. Yeah, he was. He played Thanos through makeup.
Yes.
I thought it looked okay for what it was.
It did. It looked very much like the Mad Titan that I remember.
And very much informed the Thanos we had, played by Josh Brolin, but very different.
Yes.
That first Avengers movie, which we haven't really spoken about much.
No.
We've sort of gone all over the place,
we
jumping back and forth.
We have jumped back and forth, and it also did... one of the big things I loved about the... because I was a big fan of... I'm still kind of a big fan of X-Men. I particularly loved the comics. Was... when they did have Thanos show up, they had his messenger, I forget his name, he spoke to Thanos, was like, the Avengers is to court the Avengers is to court death itself, and I'm like, Lady Death, and then
never came to be.
Nope.
Yeah.
I was so looking forward to the inevitable crossover where Thanos is just chilling out, and then he gets assaulted by Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. He's just sitting there, it's like, go away, but we have got the same girl.
Yes, yeah, in the comics, Death is personified by a person, a lady, and Thanos was in love with her, as was Deadpool, which would have been a fantastic film to see, or it would have been an interesting film to see at least.
A real interesting rom-com idea right there.
You think they'll ever do that? They'll ever go like, oh, let's bring this back, let's bring back Thanos and have him in love with... Who would you cast as Death? Helen Mirren. Why not? not a slight against Helen Mirren, but just, the power.
Yes.
And the energy, and she'd probably be a CGI character.
Yep.
And Thanos is a CGI character, and Deadpool is a man in a suit with CGI eyebrows.
So, yeah, it'll be a very CGI-intensive film.
Yeah. Just an animated film, why not? Why not?
Why not?
Yeah, see that. But the first Avengers film is really interesting.
It is.
It's a bit bland stylistically. It's very clean, very crisp. Like it's just, I think it's shot in high frame rate or something. It hasn't got much color correcting or style to it. It's just very, we're focused on the characters. We're bringing them together.
Bits and pieces is on a soundstage.
Not as much as they would do in later films. You'd have so many just actors in front of green screens, and this seemed to be a lot of physical sets as well.
But much like what Black Panther recreated.
Oh?
They did have a lot of physical sets, but with blue screens off in the background.
Yeah, well, you compare it to the later Avengers films, where they are filming on a physical set, but with a lot of green screen.
Yes.
And then they just replace it all digitally, where none of the backdrops that they're actually standing on match what they're doing.
No.
It's, sort of sad in a way. It's sort of falling back to the old prequels and Hobbit sort of curse, where it's all just green screen.
It is.
A highlight of the first Avengers film, which hasn't really... We sort of continued on. Is Tom Hiddleston as Loki.
Absolutely. They capitalized on him and sort of... They realized the star power that they've just created and had.
And it's still going on.
Absolutely.
I mean, Loki, one of the most interesting TV shows from the Marvel Cinematic...
Yes, it was.
And it's interesting that Loki is the one that we see in this first Avengers film, just an alternate version, slightly removed. But that first Thor film, directed by Kenneth Branagh, was really Tom Hiddleston's first big thing.
Yes.
And people were kind of enchanted by him, in that film. And then he just shows up in the Avengers with that wicked grin.
He's the bad guy.
And steals every scene he's in. And
yeah.
has created a legacy and a character that is still going on to this day. And also sort of created it, or perpetuated a blueprint, because you had a trope for quite a few years now where a villain was captured, put into a glass cell, then would break free.
Or just put into a cell.
And would break free. Started with Heath Ledger's Joker, continued with Loki, and then, what was his name? Skyfall's villain.
Salva.
Yes, Javier Bardem found himself, in a similar situation. You then had, what was the film that came out afterwards? I had it, but it's gone now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that first Avengers film. Nondescript alien villains.
The Skitari.
The Chitauri or something like that, yeah.
Satari.
Yeah.
No, not the Satari. Chutari.
Whatever works.
Yeah. Aliens.
Yes, big generic grey aliens.
Yeah.
For the villains to punch and blow up, and you saw New York destroyed.
Yes.
But yeah, it was a film that people do take for granted now, and that it juggled all these characters, and people didn't think that Thor would work on the same screen as Captain America, but it did.
It did.
And still continues to this day, this massive franchise. People love Thor and Hemsworth and all that. And
without the Avengers, there wouldn't have been a continuing MCU.
Definitely not, no.
No. It definitely has... Yeah, it really did help solidify the foundation that the MCU is now built upon.
And it did lead to a bit of laziness, I guess. People have criticised, like especially films like the sequel to this film, Avengers Age of Ultron, which was a bit...
It's not even an age. I'm sorry.
It was a long weekend of Ultron.
Yeah, the
bank
mild
holiday.
Inconvenience of Ultron.
Yeah. Things were a bit lazy for a time, they were sort of a bit generic, a bit homogenous.
With Whedon back to return directing the film, it was more of a sequel beta than anything. It was baiting for the Dark World, or I think it was Ragnarok at that time,
which ended up very different.
Yes,
from what we ended up seeing. Hey,
it was pretty much just too focused on everything else not being it.
In saying that, yeah, it did fall to the curse which a lot of their competitors did.
Yes.
It wanted to do too much too soon.
And it also did fall to the third act climax curse that they now suffer from.
Just have to be bigger and better and bigger and better.
And better, and then it feels refreshing when you have a more localized, smaller threat to deal with.
Yeah, I'm terrified that Moon Knight is going to do something stupid and big and bombastic.
Absolutely, where it completely ignores the character's development and it just throws it out the window for a little bit just to have this big CGI fight.
Yeah, but that first Avengers film just did it right, It decided, what's the threat? Who are the heroes? We've got to bring them together. We've got to do it naturally. Some characters did suffer. A lot of people noted, like Thor probably only has 15 minutes screen time in the entire film. But he makes an impact. He's there. He does stuff. He's not wasted. He's not just standing around. And even when he is standing around...
I think he has more time than Jeremy Renner as Hawkeye.
Yeah, well, I think it's only in the last few years that he's really sort of grown as a character. And
yeah,
he's still around, isn't he? We just had the Hawkeye series a few months ago.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of these films... And I'm going to keep going back to it. But yeah, they keep trying to replicate that final third act where the world is in jeopardy and it's a giant CGI fight.
Even more so nowadays.
Yeah, and they're really suffering from it. I mean, the Spider-Man films felt so refreshing because it wasn't a world-ending threat.
And then it became a universe-ending one.
And then they really upped the stakes there.
Yeah.
Shang-Chi suffered from that
It
curse
did.
as well.
Yep, the bus fight was the best part of that film.
Absolutely.
And then,
Black Widow also suffered from that.
yep, it was great when it was spies running around Budapest and, crashing through traffic. And then once it became a helicarrier falling out of the sky, it was too much.
I mean, the only time it actually felt appropriate was with Winter Soldier. And I think that's really where the magic's been bottled again, was Captain America and Winter Soldier.
And yeah, that was a film that sort of explored a more political espionage side, domestic terrorism, which, we mentioned earlier.
Corruption from within the system.
Yeah, a deeper look, not too deep, we're not talking about, some deep political thriller here, but it has shades of it. And that was really a film that looked at what the Avengers did, said, cool, that's what we've got, let's do something new. Whereas a lot of the films after the Avengers, from both Marvel themselves and other producers, went like, that worked, let's try to replicate that.
Yeah, Winter Soldier took the idea of, okay, the Avengers exist, what are the bad guys going to do if they can't get rid of the Avengers? They're going to target the next generation.
Yeah, and to see the level of corruption that existed and to sort of slyly comment upon real-world issues as well.
Precisely. And with probably one of the best I can't remember at the time... If the time around the Winter Soldier appearance was if it had that bad Captain America run in the comics where it turns out he was a sleeper for Hydra.
It was a few years afterwards. I think it was 2016. It was when things were really going crazy in the world. People were like, "What? No, you can't do that."
Yeah.
And understandably so, people were worried. But it ended up being okay.
It was a wonderful...
And led to a fantastic joke in Endgame.
Yes.
Fantastic payoff there. But yeah, sorry, final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I'll keep to the Marvel series, but when it comes to the movies, I'm really gonna shrug and go, until they show me that they're gonna stop being formulaic, I'm not gonna care as much.
The Avengers did a lot
It
for
did.
cinema, good and bad. It allowed the MCU to flourish. It allowed some films to come along, which we never would have seen otherwise.
Precisely.
For every failure, like the Dark Universe, we did get a really good horror film in like The Invisible Man, so that's kind of shows the effect that these films have had. But yeah, it was good. It's funny to look back at it now, and hopefully we get some more exciting stuff in future. But anyway,
Hopefully.
this has been the Geeks Review, discussing the Avengers 2012. I'm Royce.
And I'm Joshua.
See you next time. Bye for now.